Welcome to this episode of Dr. Kamini Rao's Masterclass. We have one person I would have always wanted you to meet, and that is Dr. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. The reason I want you to meet her, that she is a bundle of everything rolled up into one that I wanted to be, and maybe I have put in a few of that in my own, but let me introduce her as an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a trainer, a person who actually mothers a whole lot of employees and is always involved in every aspect, be it a medical aspect or an operational aspect. She's on the job, feet on the ground, and this is a person who's in a man's world. She actually broke the glass ceiling, did the brewer's course, and a kind of a man's job, and she was able to sort of tell people that she can do something. So today I must introduce to you that Dr. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw is one friend of mine. We studied together in school, but mind you, she's one person who's been able to break all barriers and come up. Let's talk to her and find out what she has to tell us today about her career spanning over almost 40 to 50 years. Over to you. Hello, Kiran. It's such a pleasure to meet you after so long.
Kamini, it's always great to connect with you because we are old friends. And I think just as I've been sort of focusing on my business, it's great to see you grow into such a wonderful opinion leader in the medical world. So I think just as you have sort of watched me grow, I think I've also watched you grow.
Yeah, but Kiran, when we looked at the times when you were there on this Grant Road and in the brewery house, etc., I remember the times when you always felt that you wanted to be a doctor, and then you told yourself, I want to be a doctor, and then you just missed it. And I think medicine is poorer because of that, but biotechnology is richer for that. And I would say that you really broke the glass ceiling, because I never even knew what biotechnology was when you actually took that kind of stance. And I always feel that you always treaded a path which was untrodden, or rather you created a path and then tread on it. What's your thought on that?
That's very kind of you to put it that way, Kamini, but you're right. I mean, your sister Mohini and I were classmates, and we wanted to pursue medicine. Of course, Mohini went on to doing medicine, but as you know, both of us didn't make the grade when we first applied for medical college. And then, of course, I then decided to do zoology and chemistry and botany honors in Central College. And after that, of course, I decided to then go down a very different path, which was to pursue brewing science. And it's only when I didn't get a job as a brewer on my return to India that an accidental encounter with an Irish biotech entrepreneur, Leslie Auchincloss, got me to start this business. And let me put it this way, yes, it's very tough to create your own path, as you call it. So yes, I was a job seeker, and then I suddenly decided to pivot myself and become a job creator instead. So I had to create my own job to begin with. And that journey has been a very exciting journey for me, because as you very well know, right from school days, I've always wanted to take up challenges. And I've always been kind of, guided by a sense of purpose, because I felt it's a spirit of challenge but a sense of purpose. So why did I want to become a doctor? Because I thought, wow, doctors do such a great job for society as a whole, and I want to do my bit as a doctor, but that never came about. So when I went into entrepreneurship, when I started my company in 1978, I realized that it was not going to be an easy path because of many reasons. I was 25 years old. I was a young woman. I had no business experience. And of course, I didn't have money to back my business. You know, I had 10,000 rupees in the bank. And, you know, people didn't want to work for a woman. So all across, I was a high risk in every sense of the word. You know, banks didn't want to lend to me because they said, what is this strange business you're trying to start called biotechnology? And then you're trying to start a business where you've had no business experience, you're too young to start a business, and you don't have money to back that business. So it's too high risk for us to back. As I mentioned, people didn't want to work for me because they said, women, you don't give job security to us, so we don't want to work for you. So these were the credibility challenges which I know were unfair and very gender loaded, but I had to overcome those challenges. So I took it on as a challenge. My sense of purpose was that, hey, this is a very exciting business I'm trying to create because it's about replacing polluting chemical technologies with eco-friendly enzyme technologies. And it was an idea ahead of its time because in the 70s and 80s, you know, climate change and environmental sustainability was hardly something anyone spoke about. And here I was trying to speak about it and people would look at me and say, what is this Greek and Latin you're speaking? Because they thought it's a waste of time. And everyone would say, you know, when I used to tell them, listen, you know, you're polluting the waterways, we can help you to sort of make sure that you don't do that. And they would say, what are you talking about? We are allowed to do that. You know, that was the message they would give me. So it was very tough to get your business idea across to people. But then slowly but surely I managed to do that. I managed to convince one banker to give me a credit line. I managed to convince the Karnataka State Finance Corporation to give me a loan to build my factory with. And a few years later, when I was trying to build my homegrown technology and scale it up, I was able to convince Mr. Vagul of ICICI to basically not just give me a loan, which is what I actually went to him for, but he gave me even better news. He said, listen, I've just started a venture fund. I'd rather invest in your company and help you grow it than to give you a loan. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And I very innocently asked him, you mean I don't have to return that money to you? And he said, yes, that's what venture funding means. It means that I invest in your company and as you grow, we grow. And then I can cash out at a later stage. So that was how he put it to me. And of course, they did very well out of that funding because within a year, Unilever came and bought them out at 4 times what they had put in. So that then told me what this value creation journey was all about. You know, up until then, I didn't even understand what it was to build a company, what it was to create value, how a business translates into value creation. All that I didn't understand. I only understood profit and loss and selling and making. But I hadn't realized that technology is about IP and value creation. All that I learnt across time. And you know, when we went public, of course, it was a eureka moment for all of us because we were a $1 billion company on the first day of listing, which told us, oh my God, is this the value we've created over the years? And so I think it's important for entrepreneurs to realize that when they build their companies, they have to do it in a very judicious way in terms of having a sense of purpose, being very passionate about what they're trying to do, and about perseverance. So, you know, it is about purpose, perseverance, and passion. These are the 3 P's which are my 3 tenets. That if you don't have a purposeful mission, you're not going to stay very engaged and invested in what you're doing. If you don't persevere, you know, you will not be able to succeed big time. And if you don't have that passion which drives you to persevere and have that sense of purposeful mission, again, you're not likely to succeed in the way you should. So it's unleashing that entrepreneurial potential that every one of us has in us.
Skills, you depended on your father quite a lot, and he was the one who influenced you to getting into this brewing thing. So with his kind of thought process, but there's another side of you, which is your mother, Imagine, even by the age of 70, she was still an independent person and was still pursuing. And of course, she's very, very highly independent. So, that independent nature must have come from your mother.
Yes, I think both my parents had a very strong influence on me. Okay, my father was a great influence because he never differentiated between me and my two brothers. He felt that every one of us has an opportunity to build our lives in our own way. And he would always tell me, Kiran, just because you're my daughter and you're a girl doesn't mean that you should aspire any less than your brothers. And he, therefore, when I wanted to pursue some applied science after my BSc zoology honors, he said to me, he said, why don't you do brewing science? And I said, brewing? I mean, I'm a girl, for God's sake. He said, so what? Science is agnostic to gender. And brewing science is fermentation science. You are interested in microbiology, you are interested in fermentation science, and you want applied science. What better area than brewing to understand what science is all about? So with that goading by my dad, I went to Australia and I did this brewing program. And of course, I was very confident when I returned to India because I had learned so much. And I had hands-on training in brewing at different breweries in Australia. So I was full of myself thinking, oh, I'll get a job very easily. But then when I came back to India, I got a rude shock because none of the breweries wanted to hire a woman. They said, this is not a woman's job. And even if you are very technically competent, I don't think we can risk handing our brewery to you to run. Because, you know, I don't think union leaders will like to deal with you. I don't even think our workers will be comfortable dealing with you. So they had their own mindset and prejudices about a woman manager. So I was very despondent, and that's why I think when I got this opportunity to start my own business, I thought to myself, let me show these people that I can do it. And I think that's how I started the company.
But I feel,
and of course, as you say, my mother has I think given me those genes of independence, that independent thinking, that fierce independence, that, you know, I should do things on my own. Yes. And my mother is that kind of woman. Yeah. Even today, at the age of 89, she wants to stand on her own feet. She runs her own laundry business. She's very successful. And my husband John often jokes, you know, Mummy, you should have an IPO.
Yeah. But you know, one thing with her that I've always seen, she's so passionate about what she does, and she's always talking about newer ways of doing the laundrette, and also about that organic farming. I mean, she also was very, very proud about that organic farming. I mean, imagine at that age to be still thinking of newer ways of doing organic farming.
Yeah, according to her, this mental engagement, this active aging, by being mentally engaged in something is very important to her. She said that's how you remain young. I mean, today you should see my mother's friend circles, from very young people in their teens to very old people. I mean, that's her, you know, cross section of friends, and I would say most of them are young. She says, I suffer from hyperthymesia.
What's that now?
Means not forgetting.
Not forgetting.
I mean, my mother is phenomenal. She can remember birthdays, names, and even, you know, family associations. So, I mean, yes, I think all of us derive certain genes from our parents, but then it's up to us to, you know, chart out our own paths. And we need to develop our own, obviously, DNA and personality and our own style. So I owe a lot to my parents, but I also think I have my own individualistic style.
Yes, very much. But what happens is, along the way, you meet a lot of people who influence you. And I think when you went through this path, you were actually creating this path, and you didn't know where the next stop was. But as you started creating the path, it was almost like a treasure hunt. And you said, that is good. Okay, let's go in that. So there was never that fear of failing, because you took failure as again a stepping stone, isn't it?
Most successful entrepreneurs are very experimental by nature. I mean, let's look at an example of Elon Musk. Okay, he is an entrepreneur who consistently and constantly experiments with new ideas. Okay, So you can see what all he's done, you know, from right from the Tesla vehicle to now SpaceX to the the shuttle travel, the pods that he's developing for extra fast travel, and things like that. So I think most entrepreneurs actually keep thinking about the next thing, the next new thing. And I am also like that. I have to keep reinventing myself every step of the way, otherwise I get bored. So, for 20 years I developed novel enzymes. But even that was interesting because we kept on innovating and inventing new enzymes and new enzyme technologies, which kept me going for quite a long time. And then there came a point, an inflection point in my life, which of course brought me back to my interest in medicine. And I said, why can't I use these technologies to develop biopharmaceuticals?
That was the point that I was
And that was my turning point, because I started with insulin. And if you remember, India was at the epicenter of diabetes. And we were importing all our insulins, and most of the insulin that was being imported was animal insulin, because human insulin was very expensive. And most people in India could only afford animal insulin because they felt it was very expensive otherwise. And as we know, animal insulin is immunogenic. So I just felt, why can't I develop recombinant human insulin using some of these enzyme technologies that I have developed, and see whether I can develop a low-cost insulin for India. So that's how my journey in biopharma began. And then of course I went beyond insulin. I went into antibodies for cancer, because that was another unreachable expense for most people who suffered from cancer. And we knew at that time that chemotherapy was quickly giving way to immunotherapy, and most people couldn't afford it.
What influenced you to get into cancer? Is it because of certain people that influenced you? And you said that because you're one person, you're very emotive, and then and you're very attached to people, and if you feel about a person, you'll go all out at it. Because I remember one of your friends, when she had a problem, Nilima, and you had to get some monoclonal antibodies, you were searching everywhere, and I just said, now this person is going to do something in that area, I am very sure about it. And I had mentioned this to Arvind as well, and I knew that this was going to happen. And then suddenly you found that it was your mother and then husband. So, you had this influence.
It certainly started with Nilima, my friend, who had breast cancer, and I was devastated when I heard the news. And I really walked the path with her because she was my dearest friend. And I saw the suffering and the anxiety and the toll it took on her. And she was very brave, she fought it very bravely, and she always had a smiling face. But I knew what she was going through. And I remember, even though she was very well off, I remember she needed to take, in fact, it's so ironical, she needed Herceptin and Avastin. These were the two drugs she needed. And both of them she had to import from the US at huge cost. I mean, it was costing her like lakhs of rupees just to get one dose. And she said, Kiran, and I would say, look, let me help you. And she said, no, I need to pay for this myself. It might bankrupt me, but I need to pay for it myself. She was also very proud. But I could see how expensive these drugs were, and I was saying, why should they be so expensive? And that's how I went into making those drugs. And then I remember the first drug I made was an antibody I imported it from, I licensed it from Cuba.
Oh. Yes.
It was an EGFR drug which is sold today as Biomab.
Yes.
And I remember Nilima's cancer had a high expression of EGFR, so I said, why don't you try this, it might help you. And I'm really pleased, Kamini, because she actually used my drug. She had such implicit faith in me. She said, I'm going to use your drug. And she used my drug, and I think I extended her life by 2 years. So that is what gave me that sense of purpose, saying, no, I must get into cancer drugs. And then of course my husband got cancer. And then of course my mother also had cancer. Of course, thankfully they didn't need my drug. I mean, my husband needs immunotherapy. My mother didn't. So I realized the power of these these products, these medicines, these new medicines, because they really are transformational. They can really extend life and they can really enhance life. So I'm very, very passionate about cancer research.
That is why I saw that as a result of all this cancer research, you decided that you must also have a place to treat cancer people. And so I realized also that you joined up with Devi Shetty and you had this cancer hospital, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw Cancer Hospital. How did that come about?
So you're very right. I mean, you know, when I went public in 2004, I created a huge amount of wealth. At that time, of course, by nature I'm quite philanthropic. So I felt, okay, I must now use some of this wealth for philanthropy. And so my first big opportunity was to create a cancer hospital. Because I knew at that time in Bangalore there were not too many cancer hospitals. And we had one Kidwai and there was an upcoming HCG, but beyond that there was nothing else. And I said, look, you know, Devi Shetty, who is a dear friend of mine, had done this amazing job of developing an affordable cardiac care model. So I spoke to Devi, I said, Devi, why don't you develop an affordable cancer care model? So he said, Kiran, I know nothing about cancer, but if you build me a cancer hospital, I'm sure I can do it. I said, fine, I'll do it. So I built that Mazumdar Shaw Medical Center, Cancer Center, and we started developing it as a cost-effective, affordable cancer care center. And today, I also told Devi that as a part of that center, I also want a translational research center.
Okay,
in that center, because that is one caveat I have. I'll build you the hospital, but I need one floor dedicated to research, because I feel that in India, we just don't do enough clinical research. So I said, why don't we do that? And clinical research is not just about doing clinical trials, it's about doing basic research. I said it's about, you know, bringing in researchers and working with clinicians who will give them tissue samples, and then they will look into some of these things at a cellular level and understand what is it that creates this cancer, what is it that we need to do to kill the cancer, you know, those kind of questions. And I'm really happy that today the Mazumdar Shaw Center for Translational Research is also thriving. And I'm also happy that today at the center we've created India's first CAR-T therapy company. So we created one of the largest bone marrow transplant units in the country, which is doing extremely well, touch wood. We have the best of doctors, great success rate. We've done over a few thousand bone marrow transplants till date. And I think on an average we do about 500 transplants a year, and I think we're trying to even increase that. But then I said there is also some new cutting edge areas where we need to bring in more therapies, and one such area is the CAR-T area, which is basically it is engineering your own cells and fighting the cancer yourself. So it is an autologous cell therapy. So what you do is, and these are done usually for hematological cancers. So people come in with blood cancers like leukemia, myeloid leukemia, ALL, all these kind of things, lymphomas. And then what you do is you take their blood, you basically look at their T cells and you engineer their T cells in such a way that when you push it back into the body, it will kill all the cancer cells. So you re-engineer the T cells, because the T cells at the moment don't recognize the cancer cells, so they allow them to multiply. But the moment you engineer the T cells, you can go and attack those cancer cells, and it's a curative therapy. Except that these therapies cost almost $500,000 to $1 million. And if you need it, and it's only done in the West. So I said, why not we bring it here, and like always what we do, can we bring it down to at least to begin with a tenth of what it costs. Yeah. And that's what we're doing. So we've set up Immunil Therapeutics in the Mazumdar Shaw Medical Center, and I'm really glad I have one of the world's most famous oncologists, Siddhartha Mukherjee, who has joined me in this effort. And so we've set it up. We already have a team. We have almost 30 people working on that center. And hopefully by the middle of next year, we would have treated our first patient.
Wow. Another question on this, Kiran. How do you manage to get a lot of, the doctors as well as, people who are so trained, and you manage to keep them, because that in itself is an art. That's what people would want to do.
So I think the only way of keeping people engaged, or people, or getting people to remain very focused on what they are doing, is to give them exciting challenges and to empower them and to let them do what they need to do. I'm not the task oriented person who says you should do this and you should. I'm a kind of a person who throws a challenge at you and says solve this problem. Technology that I've talked about, it is actually a gene and cell therapy company. So we will be using at the next level CRISPR gene editing, offering the gene therapy to patients. So one thing at a time. So we start with CAR T. These days CAR Ts are also using CRISPR gene editing technologies, but then we will move on to other gene therapies later on. So that's the plan.
Because, in fact, you can go into a whole lot of genetic disorders once you get into gene editing, because the sky is the limit once you get into this. Of course, the blood disorders are a major chunk.
No, and of course rare diseases, liposomal, these are all very serious diseases. So there right now you are giving them the missing protein, but I think long term you should give them genes which can fix it.
There was another thing which you were talking about, compassionate entrepreneurship. What do you mean by that?
Compassionate capitalism is the label I give. Today, businesses have lost their sense of social purpose. It's all about profits and money. And they don't realize that they have to be a business that is socially sensitive, that they realize that they should not be excluding people who want their products. So for instance, today, you look at the pharmaceutical business, it's a very good example. The Western pharmaceutical model is high value, low volume, and they only cater to people who can pay for their products, right? So they focus on affluent countries and affluent patients. And in fact, we have seen many irresponsible CEOs of pharma companies saying, we do not make products for the developing world poor patients. And that is a very insensitive, heartless, unethical statement to make. In fact, he was crucified for that statement. But at the same time, we must understand that we are in a humanitarian business where our products are for patients, right, who need them. Why would you deny any patient your product just because they can't afford it? So according to me, what we are trying to do in India is to develop affordable access for any essential or life-saving medicine. So for instance, we are the lowest cost producer of generic medicines. We see ourselves as a lowest cost producer of biosimilar drugs, and I want to be the lowest cost producer of any drug. Need across the world. And you must make it accessible. So for instance, I embarked on something called the 10 cents insulin mission, where for 10 cents a day, you could actually get insulin in any part of the world. Where today there was a huge scandal in the US because insulin was costing $150 per vial, which in our country costs less than $1. So that was the kind of price gouging and profiteering that goes on in the pharmaceutical world, which I am ashamed of. So insulin is just one example, but I can tell you that any drug you get today, it is about profits for the pharma company, and they don't care about patients. So that is why this whole thing of profiteering at the cost of patients, it's a horrible terminology, but it's true. So I thought we should be compassionate. Our capitalism should be that we should have economies of scale that can actually deliver affordable drugs to patients, whoever needs it. And then I've always said, my idea of a blockbuster drug is not about $1 billion, but about benefiting 1 billion patients. And if you have that kind of approach to capitalism, you will make a lot of money. I mean, today look at our vaccine manufacturers. Okay, they are going to make a lot of money, but at the same time, they're serving the people, right? And they are going to be the lowest cost producers of vaccines in the world. So if you think about that and you don't be, if you're not greedy, but if you're sensitive and if you have compassion and you care and you actually use your capitalism to be compassionate,